Hey everyone, welcome to ARC Studio Presents. I'm Micah Craddy, a WGA screenwriter and the head of writing at ARC Studio, the best screenwriting app in the world, and you can check it out at arcstudiopro.com. Please put your virtual hands together for Daniela Taplin Lundberg.
Hi, Micah. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I am so excited to chat with you tonight. I'll read just a bit of your bio to give people some context on who you are and kind of some of the things you've done. Producer Daniela Taplin Lundberg is the founder of Stay Gold Features, an independent film finance and production company. She has produced over 20 films, including The Kids Are All Right, which I really loved, Beasts of No Nation, Honey Boy, Harriet, and many more. She was named to Variety's 2020 Women's Impact Report and is the recipient of the 2020 Hollywood Critics Association Producer of the Decade Award, which I actually watched your acceptance speech, which was really cool. And she is a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, and sits on the executive board of the Producers Branch of the Academy. And I think that's all the time we have. A pretty extensive bio. I want to reference the part of your bio that says you produced over 20 films. What does that actually mean? What is a producer and what is your job as a producer?
What I say to people who aren't in the business is the producer is generally, in another business, you would consider them the sort of founder and CEO of a startup, right? They're the person who typically finds the idea and then has to go about pulling the team together. So that often means an original piece of IP, a book or an article that I think seems interesting, going to option that so I can control it, and then finding a writer who can then adapt that in a way that I think feels really unique, finding your director, often finding a valuable piece of cast that lends valuable to the marketplace, whether that means through foreign pre-sales or just typically going out to a studio. And then it means finding your line producer, budgeting, finding the locations, crewing, overseeing the production, and then taking it all the way through to the release of the film. So you're sort of the person that should be there from the very sort of nascent early moment to the very end.
Now, it seems like in there's a mix of the creative and sort of the business side. Is that fair? Is this more, I don't know, right-brained or left-brained, or Is it a balance?
I mean, I'm sure you guys know that there are so many people who fall under the role of producer. And, you look at the credit of an independent film and sometimes there's upwards of like 8 producers, 20 executive producers, associate producers, co-producers. The way I've come up through the business is just sort of being that linchpin that sort of connects them all. A lot of producers these days, or executive producers, take that moniker on if they provide financing or they provide a piece of talent or they do one thing or another. The way that I've always approached producing is like taking the ball and being responsible for it. I have to sign all the signatory paperwork. I'm ultimately responsible. I often have to escrow my fee if the film goes over budget. So I'm sort of the one that is sort of responsible for the product at the end of the day.
What differentiates a film that you'd love to watch versus one you'd love to produce?
A lot of the films I love to watch are not necessarily ones that I could have figured out how to produce. And I think that as a producer, and by the way, writers and producers, they're 2 different buckets, right? But as a producer, I need to think more and more with, not only do I love the writing, but I also think that this concept, the larger concept of what I'm hearing, what I'm being pitched in the first 5 minutes, is something that I think is novel and commercial, and also for my company will change hearts and minds. That's sort of like one of our philosophies about what we do. And if I can sort of check those 3 boxes, then I'm going to lean into, the writer or the screenplay or the pitch. And so I think also the thing that I'm learning, and I've been like super reluctant to learn this, but also understanding where the market is. And so, I started our TV business with my team a couple years ago, and our first TV projects were all super period, difficult.
Peak TV.
Just like stuff that like I wanted to watch, but the market wasn't going to buy. And it literally took me like 2.5 years to realize that like no one was going to watch that period drama about like, this group of like early writers in, Shakespeare's time. Like I would have watched that, but like the market was just like, unless you're Ryan Murphy or some like really tremendous showrunner, it's very hard to get something that's expensive over the hill. And so, I've just started to look towards our TV business through that lens. And I've always sort of looked at my movie business through that lens, because I had to go and turn around and go sell my investors on something that I really believed in. So I needed to be able to make it for an affordable budget if I couldn't get it set up at a studio. As a producer, if you want to continue to be able to bring investors to the table, you have to be able to show some sort of success rate, and show that the movies that you bank on and that that you believe in are actually going to be sold and seen. I tend to read the scripts that are potentially for us to produce, and I have a team who works below me who are reading all the samples, getting familiar with young up and coming writers. I mean, they're really, really hungry to do that. And so I would say, like, when you're as a writer, it always behooves you to sort of reach out to the development exec whose job is to find new voices, right? And if you're going to try to like reach out to JJ Abrams isn't reading every sample, but I can assure you that he has a team that is, because they're looking for the voices and the new talent that like is going to fill the writer's room in the next Lost or whatever it is,
So those people are like, the titles like creative executive, sometimes a coordinator,
head of coordinator. Even my assistant is like reading stuff all the time. And if she loves something, I will totally read it. If an intern loves something and thinks it's amazing, we'll read it. You know what I mean? It's like, we don't have that many people. So the people we have around us actually have our ear. And if they love something and give it good coverage, we're going to read it, And so ultimately in this business, network still is so much. So if you can get yourself into a writer's group or go to one of these schools where everyone is sort of like headed in the same direction, then you suddenly have this whole group of people who are going into the marketplace, and maybe one person's going to be an assistant at a production company and one person's going to be in the mailroom at WME or whatever it is. But like, you've got to hold on to that network, because slowly everyone's going to start to climb the ranks, and suddenly those people have impact. They have real voices.
One of the things I love to tell people is, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because I remember like very early on when I first came to LA, like you see the people who can hire you, you see the people who are making the decisions, and you're like, oh, I need to get their attention. But those people like you are very busy people who are more advanced in their careers. They have families. They're not going out to like networking drinks every night. They're very busy. And so the trick being to network horizontally, not vertically.
100%.
How do writers who don't have, a really strong agent or maybe even representation at all, can they get their scripts read now? Or are there things they have to do to get to the point where their scripts are being read?
Again, there's no magic answer. I wish there were. There's not. I once had a general meeting with Paul Walter Hauser, that actor who I think started as a writer. He told me that the way he got his manager was that he just cold called 100 managers. And there was one that responded. And that guy is still his manager today. And I was just like, yep. Like, I wish I knew, I think like working in LA, even if you don't want to be the assistant to the business affairs agent, it's being in the space is important. And I think that it's hard if you're living in Michigan to expect to figure out how the network works. So it's New York, it's LA, it's maybe London, it's being in a space, applying for jobs at any of the places that are in the industry, taking on that work while you're writing at night. And I think you just have to like put yourself in the space and develop your network, not opportunistically. Of course, I want everyone to be authentic and like develop real relationships. But I really do think that if you can put yourself in an environment where you're going to be meeting people who work in the industry, you're more likely to get your project looked at or reviewed. Just being able to create that network of people who are all headed in the same direction, it helps. And then you hear that someone's looking for someone, a new intern or a new assistant at this job, or someone's looking for a coordinator, or and that stuff really works. And then just be the smartest person about our business that you can. Listen to all the podcasts, listen to The Town, read Deadline, read Hollywood Reporter, read Variety, go down a rabbit hole on IMDb, figure out everyone who's producing, figure out who all the EPs are on Long Legs. It's tough. I wish there was like one answer, but that's my answer.
What kind of things should people be focusing on? I'm an aspiring writer. I want to get noticed. What do I need to sort of demonstrate that I am capable of on the page in order to get noticed?
The first is voice. Like if, I remember reading Honey Boy, which was Shaya's sort of rambling story of his father and his relationship as a child actor. And I remember that script was not perfectly formatted. The structure wasn't great, but the voice, it was like I'm watching a father and son like talk about the most intimate and like kind of intense and funny at the same time stuff. And I had never sort of read a voice like that. And so that was the thing that like convinced us to jump onto that. And no one wanted to finance that. But that for me was like, holy shit, this feels like a window into someone's soul. I would say the other thing that I look for is a really, really unique concept, like something I haven't seen before. And something that I feel like, oh man, if we get this out into the world, like we're going to blow the doors off. Like if we get to Eccles at Sundance, like people are going to like go crazy.
When you're reading a script, do you notice or think about these kinds of things, like the act structure, the number of scenes within it? Is that something you're looking for, or you sort of feel intuitively?
One of my dear friends I've done a lot of work with, Michael Showalter, and he swears by, what's that cat book that
Save the Cat?
Save the Cat. He swears by that structure. And like he's like really like dogged about using that structure to carve out an appropriate screenplay. And he's done that successfully. And I think that's been like a really winning strategy for him. Sometimes I'll get screenplays that don't fit that structure and I'm just drawn to the voice again or the concept, and we can work on structure later on. But if you're like trying to just like fit into what is generally acceptable, I would say Save the Cat is a really good tool. And, I've even like tried my hand at screenwriting a couple of times just to understand like what my writers are going through. And I would say like that there is a rhyme to that rhyme or rhyme to that reason of pacing and what generally feels like a 3-act structure that feels like a, typically the right approach, unless you're trying to be like Charlie Kaufman and just like totally do your own thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you stop reading the vast majority of scripts after page 1?
No.
How long do you give a script?
We will inevitably read the first act. So we'll get to page 30. We tell our team, if by page 30 you are not convinced, you don't like the writing, you don't like the concept, and you don't like the characters, we generally stop reading after that. Okay. And if it's like, like 50-50, we generally try to give the benefit of the doubt and get through it. Because a lot of screenplays, they open really strong. Like I find that, sometimes when a screenplay is weak, sometimes it opens, you have the perfect opening scene and you're like, oh, this is a movie. And then I find sometimes that like you're excited, you're with it. And then it starts to drop off. You can tell that sometimes writers have a really strong opening concept and they're so like first act is like punchy and sharp and tight, and then they start to lose the thread in the second and third act. So sometimes you have to read the whole thing to understand really what you have on your hands.
What's more of a red flag to you as a producer? A movie with a great beginning that can't end well, or a movie that has trouble getting going but kind of finds its way to a great end?
The first is more of a red flag.
Red flag. So if it's got someplace to go, you can help them figure out how to get there.
If you land the plane, we can work on that first act. If you're like working things out and like it really starts to come together and you like have a great close in the second and third act, like, you know, I think about like the first Robert Eggers movie, The Witch. The reason The Witch works is like that last scene it so sticks the landing that you're just like, holy shit, I got to go back to the beginning and make sure I didn't miss something. And so I find like a lot of things you know, if you're intrigued enough, you really want to like keep going, because sometimes there's just a masterful quality that you're just not totally hasn't totally been fleshed out maybe in the first act.
All right, so let's say you are reading a script as a potential project. What are you looking for in a script that you would potentially want to produce?
So like if you guys go and look on my slate of movies, there's really like it is very hard to figure out like what the theme is, you know, like I think if you go to Monkey Paw, you sort of understand the theme there. If you go to J.J. Abrams' company, you understand the theme there. I think we're more driven by the triumph of the human spirit, things that feel original, things that feel commercial. And I would say like that is something that's like evolving more over time. I have to sort of feel like it feels different and unique, but there's an audience for it, you know, like someone's going to want to go see that, and maybe people in droves are going to go want to see that. And so that's a little bit what guides us.
In another interview, I heard you talking about the necessity of creating an event when you make a movie to get audiences excited to see it. So I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you mean by creating an event, and how specifically does the screenwriter and the script play into that idea of creating an event?
Listen, Marvel movies are an event, right? They're superheroes. There's an event around them. People come out in droves to see those movies because they feel like I'm going to miss out on something if I don't go see this. And I think that there is a way to create an event in independent film. And listen, I'm trying to make as many studio films as I am independent films, but really I just want to make good content. And so for me, I'm like, why does this feel worthwhile? Why will people come out to see this? Whether this is pressing play on Netflix or coming out to the theaters. And so it's the question I always ask when I'm working towards getting a movie made. And so like in the example of Honey Boy, I was like, oh my gosh, this story, this is Shia LaBeouf's story. He has like a massive following from his childhood as a child actor. This is him playing his own father. It's such a tight, incredible script. I felt like this is something people are going to be curious about. This isn't going to be Deadpool, but it's going to be its own event in that people are going to be curious about this. And the same goes for Harriet. I was like, Harriet Tubman, there's never been a feature film about Harriet Tubman. And if we can make it something that feels kind of uplifting and inspiring, then I'm sure we can get, you know, audiences, young and old, to come out and see this journey. And so it's really less about like thinking about it through like the Marvel lens, but like, you know, what are the trailers that when you guys are scrolling, which are the ones you stop and click on?
In terms of querying in cold emails, are there any best practices or red flags? For instance, the red flag of don't attach the script to the first email that you send is, I think, a pretty common one that people will say. Do you have any other insights on like what is a good query email look like?
Don't send an email that's 3 pages long. Don't send an email that's 1 line long. Send like a couple lines. Try to make it clever. Try to identify the things that you would respond to if someone was cold emailing you. What would intrigue you? What would like strike your fancy? You know, cleverness goes a long way. identifying yourself in some way. I just recently won, the short film award at the Miami Film Fest. It's like your CV. Went to this school. I recently won this thing, or I was a finalist on this. It helps. A lot of people aren't going to respond, but once in a while you will. You never know. You just never know. I think that in our business, we think like more is more. Like, I'm going to send this out to 100 people. I'm going to send the same email out. And I think like, if you can kind of do a little research on like, what kind of movies does this producer do? Or what kind of like talent does this manager lean into? Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be right, but you've done the work. And so the 10 emails you do, you're writing a romantic comedy in the vein of XYZ. It probably makes sense to like target a certain type of producer, right? And if you've done that homework and you see that that producer likes that kind of material, and it's just like that work matters. I love when a writer comes to the table with a lot of ideas, but is also really open to the producer's notes. Because I'm often living with the project longer than the writer I've hired has been. So there's certain ways in which I feel the film needs to get out into the marketplace. If you're collaborating with a producer who's paying you, it behooves you to really, really listen and properly collaborate. And I don't like to stand over my writers. I really love to have sessions together, really workshop, and then I love to get sort of a beat sheet of like what the writer's thinking, so that if it's too far astray from like what we had talked about, we can address it before they've just spent like 8 weeks or 12 weeks writing a screenplay. And then once that beat sheet's done, love to just let the writer go.